Hello and welcome. Well, the traditional baby and toddler sleep training methods that we all know, like, and trust, would you believe, originated in the 1950s and 60s. Now, as a parent, I'm sure that you've heard all of these phrases before, which include behaviors like not to allow the baby to be awake for more than a certain amount of time during the day, depending on the age, to avoid overtiredness and overstimulation. Also, to watch out for a list of tired cues, and at the first tired sign, to put the baby down and ensure the baby is placed in the cot drowsy but awake. And then after this, of course, to work on a feed, play, sleep cycle. Now we're here today to share with you a new approach that may raise a few eyebrows. Now, this approach is known as a revolution in baby and toddler sleep. It is internationally recognized, evidence-based approach overall, which interestingly is not sleep training at all. Now, what does all of this mean? Well, we're about to find out. And to help explain, we welcome our special guest, Dr. Pamela Douglas. Now, Dr. Pamela Douglas is a senior lecturer at the University of Queensland, an associate professor at the Transforming Maternity Care Unit at Griffith University, and also the medical director of Possums for Parents with Babies program. Thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Hi, Rachel. I'm really well, thanks. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you today.
Likewise, and very grateful for your time. We understand you're a very busy lady. Now,
Absolutely.
following my introduction, I would love for you just to summarize, if you can, please, for everyone watching and listening, if you could provide in brief, what is this new approach to and sleep, baby and toddler sleep program that you have?
Mm. Well, I suppose if I was to just summarize the key points, really,
Mhm.
for parents in this approach, which is so different to what you hear out there at the moment around how to do the right thing by your baby around sleep. It would be to say that there's certainly a difference between excessive night waking and biologically normal night waking, and that many of our babies, for one reason or another, end up with disrupted sleep patterns, which we can actually um, deal with without needing to let our baby cry, without using the suite of strategies that you summarized, Rachel, at the very beginning, the conventional sleep training approaches,
Mhm.
or you might technically call them first wave behavioral approaches. But we can help with sleep worries um, without actually needing to resort um, to the traditional sleep training approaches.
Mhm. So this is a holistic approach known as infant care and neuroprotective developmental care, NDC. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, the Possums Baby and Toddler Sleep Program is one aspect of this holistic approach called neuroprotective developmental care, but that's a big mouthful. Parents just know it as the Possums programs.
Mhm.
So we also deal with breastfeeding, cry fuss problems, um, maternal mood, parental mood, but sleep, of course, is a huge area of concern for parents with babies and toddlers, and that's our baby and sleep toddler program just being part of the broader set of Possums programs.
And in preparation for our interview today, I was doing a lot of research, and it seems the program is the result of painstaking work of integrating the research across evolutionary biology and anthropology, neuroscience, sleep medical, lactation sciences, and a whole realm of others as well. So, congratulations on launching the program.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. It has been, a couple of decades in the making, really. Um, should I tell you in quick form how
Yeah, if you
it came
can,
to be?
how does this, well, just more, how does it differ from the traditional baby sleep methods that we know, like, and trust? I mean, how does it differ overall?
Yeah, okay. Well, probably the big thing that parents would be interested to know is that we're not using extinction methods, graduated extinction methods. Now, that's the technical name for um, trying to um, teach the baby associations by letting the baby, you know, grizzle, perhaps cry a little bit before we then go in and respond. So that's, you know, the concept in sleep training
Mm-hmm.
is that we're trying to teach the baby positive associations with the cot. We do that by um, giving the baby a bit of time in the cot to get used to it before we go back in and respond. And sometimes, of course, parents are being advised to use fairly, you know, increasingly long periods of time of letting that little one cry, depending on the specific kind of sleep training program. Um, so, so that's what we're not doing. What we're doing is saying that um, we can actually deal with disrupted sleep patterns like excessive night waking um, or um, you know, sleep problems during the day where parents feel like it's taking forever to get the little one to sleep and then the baby probably only sleeps for 10 or 20 minutes. We can deal with all of that without actually needing to tolerate grizzling or crying. And this is really I would argue the way of the future, because all the neuroscience tells us that our capacity to respond to the baby's communications or cues is what actually, it's one of the big things that optimizes developmental outcomes for our little ones. So it optimizes that lovely secure psychological attachment. Um, and yet the sleep training approaches, even though often they may be wrapped in a language around responsive settling, um, are trying to entrain the baby's biology in a way that typically really can increase stress for the family and cause the baby to it's just harder for families than it actually needs to be.
So what are some of
Um,
the outcomes that families have experienced thus far from the program and I guess these new methods overall?
yeah, well, we've had um, I'm just thinking how many studies we've actually had evaluating it now. I think we've got 3 um, that are either in press or published, um, and they show that families respond really positively to what we're offering with the Possums Baby and Toddler Sleep Program. Many actually talk about how so in the studies that have been qualitative, taking in what parents actually say, they'll
Mm-hmm.
say it just changes our life with the child and makes everything so much more enjoyable. And of course, that's our aim, just to make the nights manageable and the days as enjoyable as they can possibly be with your baby or your toddler.
Mm-hmm.
Um, now, how have I gone with telling you some of the key strategies? Maybe I need to expand on that a little bit,
Yeah. And
because
then I'd
we
love
were,
to ask you, yeah, let's go
yep,
for it. Yeah.
okay. So I talked about how there is a difference between excessive night waking, which is not manageable, or
Mm-hmm.
the baby or toddler being awake for long periods of time, you know, as a pattern in the night. Um, versus normal night waking, because our little ones will wake throughout the first year of life, indeed into toddlerhood. If we look at studies around normal infant sleep, it's just that we want everyone back to sleep really quickly. And typically that might happen, say, every couple of hours. Don't look at the clock, but normal night waking is manageable. Not every little one does wake, you know, every couple of hours throughout the first 12 months of life. But if yours is one who does, that is biologically normal. But the excessive night waking are patterns of every hour, sometimes even more often, or the little one awake for big blocks of time in the night. So we distinguish between the two for a start. But then we need to look at how incredibly variable our baby and toddler sleep needs are actually. And this is why in the Possums program, we don't ever give estimates around how much sleep your little one needs, because truly that would be misleading.
Mm-hmm.
We just want to work with your little one's sleep regulators to make sleep as healthy and as no fuss, as manageable as it can be. Um,
Wonderful.
yep, and so then we need to talk about what those sleep regulators are.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that with parents, when we're working through this together. You tell me, Rachel, what's too much information at the minute. Perhaps I won't go into the sleep regulators just now, um, but what we want to do then is set up a plan for making the days um, as governed by normal rises in sleep pressure as we can, and then that feeds through over time to healthy, manageable sleep at night. So then the next thing that's really important to communicate about, if we're thinking of this, really quite revolutionary way of working with our little person's sleep, is this whole huge thing of our baby's sensory needs. And gosh, I'm talking now to a woman who's there in Melbourne, where it's so difficult for parents right now to meet their little person's sensory needs. But this is a concept that, when I first began to pull together this program and deliver it, work with parents in this way in the clinic, and that was back, well, gosh, we had the first Possums clinic open in 2011. It had become really clear throughout my professional life prior as a GP, working with families, with young children, with babies, that little ones were dialing up, if you like, were starting to get upset inside the house just because there wasn't enough going on to meet their needs for rich and changing environmental experience.
Stimulation, yes.
Yeah, that's it. Our interior environments, and particularly the home, where we spend a lot of time, it's very low sensory for babies, and they'll tend to dial up just because there's not enough going on. But parents are
What
then
does dial
told,
up mean?
thank you. Um, this is a kind of shorthand that we use when NDC providers are delivering the Possum Sleep program. It's for the sympathetic nervous system. So, you know, if I'm dialing up, if my sympathetic nervous system is dialing up, my heart rate increases, blood pressure increases, I might get a bit flushed and shaky and sweaty. But if your bubby's dialing up, firstly, there'll be that groaning and grunting
A
and
grizzle and
writhing, and then moving into a grizzle's dialing up a bit more, and then the scream is when that dial is on full bore. And I suppose, what we know as uh, as researchers really is that if we're able to respond to our babies and keep that dial as sensibly turned down as we can. We can't always keep the little one completely dialed down, as you well know, and we can't always respond, but it's about setting up a sensible pattern over time of trying to keep that little one dialed down, and that's what's so good, really, for their developmental outcomes. It's one of the things that's really, really good for our babies, and that's perhaps what's not happening for many families in the sleep training approaches, you see, because there's often a pattern of everybody dialing up over time, over the days and over the nights, as they put in place the sleep training approaches. So we just want to keep our little one as dialed down as we can. We're responding to our bubby's cues or communications. But little ones can dial up inside the house just because they're not getting what they need from an environmental enrichment point of view. And their brain needs that because they're laying down all these neural pathways in direct response to rich and changing stimulation. And that's the other thing the neuroscience tells us, that it's this rich and changing sensory nourishment that really optimizes developmental outcomes. So we just don't use the phrase overstimulation. We'd say that's very last century. All the neuroscience tells us that the baby's brain is developing in response to lovely, healthy, rich and changing sensory input. So often the little ones are dialing up inside the house. Parents are asked to put on the sleep lens. Oh, it's a sign of overtiredness. I've got to try to get my bubby to sleep. But the sleep pressure's not that high, and it seems to go on forever trying to get the little one to sleep, and the baby may even be dialing up. And that's when we enter into the sleep battles, which are just so miserable for families, so exhausting. And we can do this in a really different way.
Mm-hmm.
So how am I going? Should I
Yes,
tell you about
that's
2 sleep regulators?
okay. Let's touch on that, and then I've got a whole series of other stuff I wanted to ask you. But
All
please,
right.
definitely tell me about
Okay.
this. Yes, as well.
Well, it's just worth every parent of a baby or toddler knowing that
Yeah.
human sleep is under the control of 2 sleep regulators: the circadian clock, um, which is set by the sun, really. So we've got, the circadian cues of daylight noise activity versus the cues of the big sleep of night when the environment's quiet and dark. And we've got the second sleep regulator, the sleep-wake homeostat, which is a system of neurohormones or chemicals that rise when we're awake and drop off when we're asleep. And when that peak is nice and high, the sleep pressure is high. And sleep is actually under the control of sleep pressure. Not all these associations that folks tell you that you've got to be setting up around sleep. That's a misconception. Sleep is actually under the control of the sleep regulators, and particularly under the control of rising sleep pressure. So if we're having sleep battles during the day, usually it's because the little one's sleep pressure is just not that high. And if we take off that sleep lens and put on the sensory lens and just think, right, on with the day. What can I do? Ideally outside the house, you see, because it's so much easier to meet a baby's sensory needs outside the home. And then just keep going from a sensory point of view until that sleep pressure is nice and high. And then sleep is easy, actually.
There you go.
Um,
So,
so is that clear? Have I
yeah,
explained that well?
very, very, very clearly and very well. So, with what we were saying at the very beginning of the chat, that this is not sleep training at all. How is this
No.
so? Is it because you're just responding to their sensory needs? And as you said, just watching that cycle and actually knowing when they are tired and then actually putting them down to sleep at that point.
Yeah, sleep training has the idea that we can change the baby's biology, if you like, to improve a family's sense of well-being, and training the biology. That's the basic idea of sleep training. Whereas we say, no, we need to work with our little one's biology. If we're working against the biology and getting the idea, for instance, that the child has to be sleeping through by 6 months of age, or if we're trying to work against the biology, there'll be some families for whom the sleep training does seem to work, but we know from the research that for most families, actually, it doesn't decrease night waking, but that actually can set up so much more stress and distress than families need to be experiencing. We
Mm-hmm.
just want to make life as enjoyable and as easy as possible when you've got a baby or a toddler in the house.
So, what type of
Um,
families have sleep training work for them then?
well, I always think, that certainly our high sleep need babies are going to respond well, whatever we're trying. I mean, if we look at the sort of bell curve of baby sleep needs, let's talk about newborns, for instance. We can have newborns who hardly need 9 hours total in a 24-hour period. Now, I wouldn't really wish that on a family, and they are at the very low end of that bell curve. So that would be a very low sleep need baby or newborn, but normal, with normal developmental outcomes, normal sleep habits down the track. And then you can have a newborn who's taking 18 hours, um, in a 24-hour period at the other end of the bell curve, still very normal. Um, and then everyone else in the middle, you know. But it's not useful to talk about, you know, your baby needs an average of 12 hours or average of 14 hours. We just want to work with your baby's unique sleep regulators and with your own family's unique lifestyle needs, actually. Um, so you can see that these high sleep need babies, no matter what you do, really, it's going to seem to work. But there have been 4 systematic reviews. In fact, I noticed another one coming out recently that show that the sleep training approaches, if you drill down into these systematic reviews that synthesize all the evidence in this space, the sleep training approaches aren't really decreasing night waking. Now, if it works for you, that's, you know, that's absolutely fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But so many families are either finding it's not working, or they just make a decision that it doesn't align with their values, their own unique parenting values, and we can never judge anyone's parenting values, and are looking for something different. And before I developed up this program, and we started to deliver it in 2011, and then at the end of 2012, after we presented about this program at a conference, Dr. Cole Whittingham introduced herself to me, and she manualized it for me and integrated it with some acceptance and commitment therapy as well. And then we went on to publish the theoretical frames. But before I started to develop up the Possum Sleep program, there was really only 2 options for parents. You either used conventional sleep training, or you kind of, it was, you know, people were told, well, just go with the flow. But often that flow was not very much of a flow at all, because families were often moving into patterns of waking every hour. The baby was awake for long periods in the night and really, you know, restless and not settling back to sleep, and parents were beside themselves with sleep deprivation. But the only solution then that would be offered was the sleep training. So, you know, this really is what we've done from 2011 with the Possum Sleep program is truly revolutionary, actually.
So you have mentioned that sleep training can make life much harder than it needs to be for families, and may even cause excessive night waking. Now, can you please
Yes,
explain
yes,
why you believe sleep training often makes life a lot harder than it needs to be for families? And
yes.
listening to what you're saying, is it that it works against the baby's natural biology? Is that what it is?
Yes, that's it. So, you know, when our babies are dialing up, so firstly, the little ones dial up, but we're hardwired to dial up when our baby dials up. That's, from an evolutionary point of view, that's what it is to be a parent. And so if our little one's dialing up because we're putting in place these strategies that we've been advised, then we'll dial up too. So we've got a situation that becomes really quite stressful for many families. And the focus during the day tends to be locked inside the house to get the sleep routines happening. The little one's dialing up more and more because there's just not enough happening inside the house from a sensory nourishment point of view. So we can get these trajectories of real distress. And of course, if we do manage to get bigger blocks of sleep during the day, which is what parents are advised to do, then in fact you won't see this immediately, but 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks down the track, we've got a really disrupted circadian clock. And that's when the excessive night waking and the blocks of time being awake in the night can really kick in as a direct consequence of the advice to get these big blocks of sleep during the day. Parents are told that they should be doing that for their baby's brain to grow in an ideal way. And that's actually, if you really look at the evidence, that's a misrepresentation. But
Mm-hmm.
it frightens parents. And, you know, if I tell you that, Rachel, you'd walk over hot coals to try to do that for your baby. And this is, you know, this is what I think we can change. We can
Change.
think about our baby and toddler sleep in a completely different way that just enriches the days for everybody, takes the stress out of sleep. And I have the view actually that we'll get our best sleep outcomes down the track for the whole family throughout childhood if sleep is really just no fuss, relaxed, cuddly, and under the control of the sleep regulators. So that means if there's any problems ever about sleep, the first thing we do is just get that regular get up time nice and early in the morning, because that's what keeps the circadian clock really healthy. So we can be a bit relaxed about that if there's no sleep worries. But as soon as we've got sleep worries for our babies, our toddlers and kids right throughout childhood, the first thing we need to do is to get that regular get up time the earliest possible for that particular family. And that's what sets good, healthy sleep from the circadian clock's point of view. Remember, it takes a couple of weeks to affect any change. Change happens incrementally when we're resetting sleep patterns. But that's the first thing. And then sleep in the evening is under the control of sleep pressure. So, sometimes we get it wrong. We think his or her sleep pressure's rising and we give it a go. But if that little one's not going off to sleep easily with whether it's the little one and it's the breastfeeding off to sleep, or a bit older and it's the story and the snuggle, then the sleep pressure's not high and we just get on with family life and try again a bit later. So, if we look internationally, babies are going to sleep more like 8:30 or 9 p.m. at night. In our society, as part of the sleep training approach, little ones are advised, we're advised that they should be down at like 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And actually, that might work if you've got a really high sleep need baby. But imagine if you've got a low sleep need baby, and a lot of us have. It's tough, but a lot of us have really low sleep need babies down closer to the 9 hours total in a 24-hour period. Well, that little one's going to be waking from 1 a.m., 2 a.m. and, every 45 minutes, every hour, every 45 minutes, every half an hour, because their metabolism is ready to start the day.
So in your research then,
Making sense? Am I
yes,
making sense
absolutely.
to you? Yeah.
So with the more higher needs families, as you were just saying with it,
I sleep need babies. Yep.
yes. Now, what have you found is the most common problem that parents are presented with concerning their infant sleep, and how would, I guess, your method then sort of overcome that and help those families?
Yep. Well, I guess, excuse me. So I guess the high sleep need babies tend not to be the problematic ones so much. It's those with low sleep need babies, or indeed in the middle, who are trying to put in place the sleep training approaches, who can run into problems. So let's imagine that we've been told that it's not okay for our 4-month-old to be awake for 4 hours, 5 hours during the day. And so after 2 or 3 hours, we're inside the house, let's say, the little one's starting to dial up. We're thinking, oh my God, I've just got to get this baby to sleep. And so we might start some rocking or bouncing on a fitball, or we might be trying to put the little one down in the cot, but then the baby cries. We might find that even though we're trying to get that little one off to sleep by a lot of vigorous bouncing on the fitball, the little one's cranky and not looking like going to sleep. And we can find that a lot of the day goes into trying to get a baby to sleep in a way that's depressing. Frankly, it's depressing for the primary carer who's trying to do this. So we'd be saying, let's think about the day completely differently. Let's be really relaxed and trust that when that sleep pressure is really nice and high, as long as the little one's also not hungry, and if we're looking at little ones, this is where you're using the breast frequently and flexibly. If you're bottle feeding, you can use the bottle in the same way. So frequent and flexible offers of milk, if we're looking at our little ones, let's say in the first 6 months, and then rich and changing sensory nourishment, which basically means that you as the primary carer, and this is much easier when we're not dealing with a pandemic, but you as a primary carer create a day outside the house that's highly social with your friends. Lots of walking, because the little ones love the richness, the complexity of the natural, or the streetscape, or the natural environment. All those parent groups, which even in Queensland have not yet really been opening up post-pandemic, or certainly pre-COVID-19, I'm forever encouraging primary carers to get really socially engaged in parent groups. Um, you know, this is the kind of lifestyle that feeds us as parents, as primary carers. It's good for us, and the baby just fits in. And sleep happens on the go when the sleep pressure's nice and high, and sleep becomes easy. And if the little one is falling off to sleep in the car seat and you've arrived for that lunch date and you get that little person out, if they need to stay asleep, they'll stay asleep. They wake up, it's all right. They'll catch up later if they need it, or they didn't need any more sleep, and we're just on with the day.
Mm-hmm.
You'll often hear that they cry when they wake because they need more sleep, but we would say that also is a misconception.
This is going to be quite difficult, not difficult, but just different way of thinking for so many mothers and mothers to be, to adapt this completely different sort of technique. And as you said, it is revolutionary. So it does take some adapting. It's a paradigm shift in thinking, in behaving, and it's it's quite an intriguing and interesting method, but no doubt it works because the science is behind it. Which I find
that's
really
right.
interesting. And I wanted to ask you, how did the concept of a baby's sensory hunger come about also?
Yes, well, I guess I was starting to see in the research literature from the 2000s the importance of environmental enrichment, really, for the laying down of neural templates. And environmental enrichment is both experience across all the senses, um, but that also includes social enrichment, interaction, that wonderful to and fro between a loving adult, or a loving big sibling, really, and the baby. And over that first year, that to and fro interaction, those reciprocity chains are growing and becoming more complex and longer. That's part of environmental enrichment. But certainly being outside the house, relative to the sensory poor interior environment, I could see that we had a real problem with that in our society. I suppose I'd always been interested in anthropology, cross-cultural studies, evolutionary biology, and could see that in what you might call the environment of our evolutionary adaptedness, human babies were exposed to much more environmental enrichment than can easily occur in our nuclear family, with often just the one primary carer on her own, or with perhaps one or two other children or whatever, inside a home. So it was using that lens. It became clear to me. And I suppose all of this, Rachel, is couched in my own experiences way, way back now as a mother, and just dealing with families over and over from, the mid-1980s as a GP. I also started out my career working in Indigenous health with First Nations peoples, and learnt a lot there about cross-cultural differences.
Wow.
In the space of the perinatal period. So all of these influences, and then of course rising up out of the research to optimize these neural templates. Our babies need lovely input across all their senses, as well as all of that lovely building up of reciprocity chains socially with loving adults. And I realized that the sleep training approaches were actually substantially decreasing the kind of sensory nourishment that our infants could access, and was causing little ones to dial up just because there was not enough going on. Um, so this was sort of how I started to think of different ways to frame it for families.
Mm-hmm. And you've also mentioned that we can't teach our little ones to sleep, and that sleep is under the control of the two biological sleep regulators, as you mentioned before,
Yep,
the circadian clock and the
yep.
sleep waking homostat. So, in saying that, is there anything else that you can maybe just expand on that at all? Because I do find that is quite fascinating.
Yeah, and
I mean,
it's a
because
really important concept, isn't it? Go on.
yeah, no, it's just that you mentioned that the amount of sleep a baby or toddler needs will vary with their own genetic inheritance. So, as you've
Yeah,
mentioned, some
yeah,
babies have higher and lower sleep needs. So,
yeah.
how does a parent understand what these needs are at such an early stage of the baby's life to be able to adapt
Yes,
like this technique to it?
yes. Such an important question because we just experiment. You know, it's the same way that we work out what our baby's signaling with their cues. Who knows? We just experiment. And so we experiment with two tools. We talk a lot. So in the Possum Sleep program and our NDC providers who might be working with parents, we talk a lot about the two tools to keep our babies dialed down. As this is looking particularly in you know the first year of life, the first 6 months. There's milk, but this other second tool of rich and changing sensory experience, and we just experiment between the two with our little ones, and then as they're developing. Um, obviously we've got solids as part of the mix. We just want to make sure that we haven't got a hungry child, but then we're experimenting with, well, let's change the sensory environment and see what happens. So rather than having on that sleep lens where we interpret things through, okay, the little one's tired and I've got to get him or her down to sleep, we experiment with a change of sensory nourishment and keep them going while the sleep pressure's rising. Um, you know, um,
Oh, I guess the baby and toddler sleep needs are really incredibly biologically variable. So it's just a
exactly.
matter of experimenting and finding what works and when and how. Is that
That's it.
right?
That's exactly it. It's kind of thinking sensory nourishment instead of thinking, now I've got to get my baby to sleep. And then if the little one's experiencing lovely, rich sensory nourishment, let's say you're out walking, child's in the stroller, you look down, they've dropped off to sleep. They've been loving the world and then they've dropped off to sleep. Or let's say dad's gone for a little bit of a walk in the evening air with the bubby. Loves it, loves being up close to dad, looking out, watching the, and next thing dad looks down, the little one's dropped off to sleep. Or for our breastfeeding women, of course, um, the breast is this wonderful tool to keep little ones dialed down, and very often, particularly depending on the age of the baby, just dials that little one down so much that the sleep regulators kick in. There's no bad habits associated with breastfeeding or bottle feeding our children to sleep in these, these first months, or going on throughout that first year of life. With breastfeeding, of course, we can use the breast um, frequently and flexibly all the way through until a woman decides she's ready to wean.
Mhm.
And we can use the breast as a tool for sleep without any concerns about bad habits. Babies don't wake excessively in the night because they're breastfeeding. They wake because if we're moving into excessive night waking, they're waking because of disrupted sleep patterns, not because of breastfeeding.
Interesting. Well, look, overall, the Possum Sleep program was the first to work with the knowledge about human sleep regulators and to create, I guess, the intervention that improves infant sleep patterns. So, congratulations on all your hard work. We didn't get to speak about the article which you have published, but we have published for you. But of course, we'll have a link through to that. And the title of the article is Baby and Toddler Sleep Help That Isn't Sleep Training. And everything that you have mentioned is included in that article also, which is wonderful. Overall, if you were to summarize your key messages for anyone watching and listening, what would they be?
We can let our baby and toddler sleep be easy and still be supporting wonderfully healthy developmental outcomes. If we have excessive night waking or a sense of distress around our child's sleep, there is a program that you can look at that, as parents tell us over and over, really can turn your life around and make the days and the nights so much more enjoyable and manageable.
And wonderful. And if families and parents have got any questions for you, whereabouts can they find you?
Possumsonline.com is our website. Possums for Parents with Babies is our Facebook page. And we're also there, YouTube channel, NDC Baby and Toddler TV. Lots of free material available as videos, blogs on either the website or, of course, in the YouTube TV channel. Yeah, we're out there, and we'd just love you to come and join us. We've got online parent support. Our PIPS closed Facebook group is growing at a great rate for support for families who are wanting to deal with these things a bit differently. So yeah, come and have a look.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, and really look forward to the opportunity of another chat in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, please just stay safe, and we'll speak soon. Okay, see you later.
Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, bye.